Hello and welcome to another episode of the Road Coach Podcast, the show where I share what I've learned from years of living on the road through research and experimentation, so that if you're like me and you live away from home most of your life, that you can not only survive but thrive even when you are out of your element. I apologize for the low light tonight or today, and perhaps if the audio is not as good as it usually is, I don't have my microphone with me, but that is because I am on the road coming to you from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, La Belle Province, while I'm on the road for an installation of some equipment at one of the hospitals here. As always, if you are listening on your favorite podcasting app, please leave us a rating, share us with your friends, let everyone know that you're getting some benefit from this podcast. We do appreciate it. If you have not checked out our YouTube channel, go to youtube.com/@theroadcoachpodcast, where you can see everything that I have up on the screen as I'm going through it with you. And if you would like to support the show and keep us going, please visit patreon.com/theroadcoachpodcast. And we thank you very much for that. So today we are doing part 4 of our 4-part series on chaos versus routine, the ups and downs of constant travel. And today we're going full circle all the way around to the benefits of change in your life and the benefits of chaos, essentially. So what does uncertainty and change do for us in our daily lives? And for those of us who travel, we know there's a lot of things we don't like about travel, and there's some things that we really do like about travel. But what about the actual physiological, mental, emotional benefits of constantly being in changing environments? And believe it or not, when I was researching for this episode, there is virtually no scientific research on this. There's a bit of scientific research, as we discussed, on the negative side of too much routine, the positive side of routine, and the negative side of uncertainty. But there's not much about the positive that comes about when we deal with constantly changing circumstances in our life. And so, but we all know they exist. And there's a reason that we all travel the way we travel. I'm going to go through some of the benefits, not from like a fulfillment perspective necessarily, or an earning potential or things like that, but just about some different sort of blogs and articles on the internet that have talked about change and how they benefit us from a physiological perspective, that we are all sort of intuitively aware of. But this episode is not going to include any scientific studies per se. So we'll get back into that next week when we start a brand new topic. But for this one, I first pulled up a blog by Lisa Masiello, and she's got an article here called "Why It's Important to Embrace Change to Get the Life You Want." And she starts out her blog post with, "The only constant in life is change," which is a quote from a 6th century Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, and she says it's as accurate today as it was when he said those words. So many people have heard that phrase, "the only constant in life is change." And for those of you who have gotten into a bit too much routine, you'll notice that life will throw a curveball at you and force you to change. So that may not be many of us that listen to this podcast or get a benefit from it, because our lives are constantly changing and we're constantly trying to keep up with it. But in this, she goes through, I think it was 8 benefits that she thinks are very helpful to keep in mind when you're trying to deal with change. And for us being relatively constant, the change. First thing that she says is that embracing change drives growth in all areas of your life. She states that because it pushes us outside our comfort zone and it makes us feel uncomfortable, which I completely agree with, in the sense that when we are constantly in changing environments and new places with new people, possibly new languages, different food, different routines, different schedules, it forces us to learn new things. So, right now, everybody speaks French, for example, in Quebec. I shouldn't say everybody, but French is the first language here, and English is my first language. So it forces me to think more in French and to respond more in French and to attempt French more often than I normally would. And embracing that change and learning more about the people where I am, it helps not only expand your mind and your capabilities and your learning potential, but it constantly makes you pay attention, essentially, and that can help you learn more in everything. And so you can learn about new cultures, new people, new customs that you aren't necessarily exposed to back at home, and that helps you grow just overall as a person, which I think is a really good point. The next thing she mentions here is that change helps you be adaptable and flexible. And that, again, is pretty self-evident in the sense that we never have control over our environments when we're traveling. We can stick to relatively the same hotel chain, maybe. We can travel in the same with the same airlines and taxis and Uber, for example, but everything's different in some ways everywhere we go. And so you can't control flight delays, you can't control the weather, you can't control the traffic, and sometimes you can't even control whether or not you have hot water in your hotel room, for example. But the beauty of that is that it teaches us to roll with the punches and live life on life's terms. And so when things do get challenging, we're more equipped to deal with those. And it just gives us, I think, more of a sense of peace and calm when we're in uncertain environments, because we're used to dealing with things that we don't have as much control over. Number 3, she said, embracing change enables you to validate and reevaluate your ideas and opinions. Now, this is, I thought, an interesting one, because I think it's something that I take for granted. But when I am constantly traveling to new geographies with different people and different customs, you tend to, over time, get less prejudiced about everything, because you realize that there are so many different perspectives on life and work and leisure and food and family, relationships, all those kinds of things, that the more you are exposed to, the more you start to question your own ideas of the way things should or could be done, because you can see so many different, life pathways of things that people choose. And so not only does it make you more tolerant, but it makes you more open-minded, and it makes you really consider things that you wouldn't normally consider when it comes to your ideas and your goals and your future and how you want to live your life. So I think that's a really good one that she mentions there. Embracing change exposes your strengths. It also exposes your weaknesses. But I think that it's really beneficial to remember that when we're constantly living in these uncertain environments, it will help us figure out what we're really good at. Because as she mentioned up earlier on in the article, we are constantly uncomfortable in different environments. And by being uncomfortable, it helps to define what we're good at and what we're not so good at, and what we can spend more time working on. So I think that's a really good point too. Embracing change lets you learn new things. I think that, again, is pretty self-explanatory, and it gives you the guts to do more, she says. So she mentions here, just underneath that point, that as you do anything more in life, you become better and better at it. And the same is true with change. Each time change makes you face a situation or an environment in which you are uncertain or uncomfortable, and you overcome your anxiety, you gain confidence that the next time the situation will be easier to handle, and the next time even easier, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is another thing that I tend to overlook a fair bit. But many people in life that lead a very, I don't want to say monotonous, but a very routine life where every day is largely the same, their environment, their nutrition, their place of employment, their family life. When your life is constantly the same and there's not a lot of change, embracing change becomes very difficult because it's such a shock to your system. But for those of us that travel a lot and live on the road, because change is such a constant, we're able to adapt to it and change even more drastically. So, for example, I've talked to lots of people who have just, picked up and moved to a different country or a different city, or they've taken that new job on because it sounds interesting, and there's absolutely no fear of the unknown because they're constantly dealing with that unknown in day-to-day life. So when things come along that excite them or interest them, there's less fear about making the wrong decision because they're so used to embracing change that even if it is the wrong decision, they will adapt, they will overcome, and they can change once again. And so I think it's a really important thing to remember when we live in these environments of constantly being away from home, is that we're growing the resilience to be able to survive in any environment. The COVID-19 pandemic really brought that out in everybody, that there's a lot of people who are not equipped to handle mass change, especially when it's forced upon us. And so for those of us that are used to traveling all the time, I think that in general, we've built this resilience to be able to handle it without necessarily breaking down or completely withdrawing from society and from life itself. Embracing change lets you handle setbacks and appreciate success. So I think the point she's trying to make here is that, she says, never will everything go perfectly for you. And embracing change means that you can be positive, or at least be content in the knowledge that things will get better in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. So it's a good point. I think it just sort of, it's related to a lot of the other points that she's making here, but because I think we are so used to having things out of our control and only controlling what we can, which is our reaction to things and what we choose to do despite what's happening around us, it helps us appreciate not only our own agency in the outcomes of our lives, but to understand that regardless of the environment we are in, there are going to be setbacks and there are going to be successes. And the environment doesn't necessarily dictate that, but our ability to adapt and react to what's happening is what will define future successes for us. So it's a good point. And lastly, she mentions embracing change lets you retake the direction you want to go. So she's talking about when you accept change or when you embrace change, it allows you to be in control of the direction you're going. And how I think that relates to a lot of us who work on the road and spend a lot of nights away from home is that it really makes us focus on what we want out of life on a day-to-day basis. It's almost impossible when you're traveling all the time to just coast and let things happen as they may. It really makes you reevaluate what you want and move in the direction of the things that you want in life. And I think that's a really good thing to remember, especially when you get stuck in the sort of the travel blues, where you just feel like you need to be home in your own bed and you're sick of this life of constantly living out of a suitcase and not knowing what your next meal is going to be, or whether you can eat the way you want to eat, or whether you'll have access to the amenities that you normally do at home. It can get very taxing and very stressful on us, as we talked about in previous episodes. So knowing that living in this changing environment allows us to evaluate, because we're paying attention to what we really want, can help us grow as human beings, which I think is great. This is actually from a tax website, Creative Tax Recruitment. They had a blog about 7 powerful reasons that change is good for you. And it's actually a really, really well thought out article, despite being from a tax company that you wouldn't think would write about this. So they give a couple of different things here. You gain confidence, which again, we've touched upon, but by being able to deal with uncertain environments, we realize that we can really deal with a lot more than we thought we could deal with. And that builds confidence within us. So they also talk about becoming more flexible, which we've already talked about, but your lifestyle is enhanced. So they say that when we avoid change, we resign ourselves to repeating the same old patterns. And this means your lifestyle stays the same with no peaks or troughs. If you decide to change your life, you can improve and enhance your lifestyle in any way you choose. And I think just, they say variety is the spice of life. I think that is really what they're getting at here, is that not only can you choose to change in a positive direction, but living in uncertain environments allows you an experience that you can't normally get when you live in the same day-to-day patterns and habits that you're always doing. They say that you're more motivated because when you've reaped the benefits of making one change, you'll be eager to see how else you can make changes to your lifestyle. And I think that is, although, choosing to take a job, for example, that has us away from home 50% of the time, It might not necessarily be a choice that we consciously thought of being in these changing environments all the time. But once we realize that we can handle them and we can live in uncertain situations, it makes us really start to realize what we do want to change. And we are not afraid to take those leaps because we know we can handle these uncertain environments and the anxiety that goes along with it because we have become more adaptable. Developing more skills is a key one here. And becoming more compassionate. So I was just talking about, being in Quebec right now where everybody speaks French. It makes you want to learn more, makes you want to relate to the people that you're working with a little bit better, and becoming more compassionate. When you're in an uncertain environment with different people and different customs, it makes you understand that there are so many different ways to live than the way you were necessarily brought up or the way you normally live at home. And so those who travel the world more tend to be the most compassionate people because they've seen different ways of life. They've seen different people's struggles and what they contend with on a daily basis. And it just makes them a little more empathetic, I find, to those that are different than us. And I think that's really important. And those people that don't travel the way we do, they don't get to see that the same way. And you attract more opportunities. I'm sure you've all heard of being in the right place at the right time, but the more you travel and the more you see out there in the world, the more you're going to connect the dots between different places and different businesses and different industries and start to put them all together to develop efficiencies in different areas that you can connect people to each other because you A, know so many people, and B, have seen so many different things that you start to connect these dots and your brain recognizes patterns that they see from one place to another and one industry to another, where you can really become an expert in both connecting ideas and connecting people. And I think that's one of the really important things about constantly traveling that we don't talk about enough is that we see a lot. We see people in different environments. We see the way people interact in different climates and in different companies. And we start to piece together these sort of puzzle pieces into a more complex picture of the interactions between human beings. And it gives us the ability to create synergies that you can't get when you're just stuck in your home environment all the time because you simply aren't exposed to them. And I really, really like that final point, attracting more opportunities. And then last article I got was from business.com. And this was how well do you handle change and the benefits of being adaptable. So in here, they talk about if you're more adaptable, which you already talked about, traveling constantly makes you more adaptable naturally, but you'll be more valuable to your business or employer. So an organization's ability to adapt can be considered a competitive advantage, and the same is true for individuals. Employers increasingly want workers who can adapt to an ever-changing workplace. They're open to someone who's adaptable is open to new ideas and doesn't need to do things a specific way just because that's how they've always been done. They can anticipate changes and they don't panic when things don't go according to plan. So again, that's from this article on business.com. I read that directly from them. But I think it's very important because industries and companies now are not hiring for skill sets necessarily as much as they were in the past. They're not hiring for education or for experience the same way they were in the past. They're hiring for adaptability. They're hiring for the person who can move quickly and change quickly with the changing times. And that is something that people who travel constantly have pre-built themselves for having success in these dynamic working environments that are just going to get more and more chaotic as time goes on. As we get more and more technology, artificial intelligence, things are going to change quicker than they ever have in the past. And being adaptable is the number one skill you can have in today's marketplace. You'll be a better leader. People who are adaptable excel as leaders because they earn the respect of their peers, they inspire those around them to embrace change, and they help grease the cogs in the wheel of even the stickiest transitions. As leaders, we face situations where we've never seen them before. We might have very little context historically as to how to deal with a situation like this. Because we're so used to dealing with change in general, we can focus on the problem, seek out solutions, and implement them quickly because we're not afraid of making the wrong decision. We're simply embracing the fact that change is going to occur, and it's better to make the wrong decision than to not make a decision at all. Because at least if you make the wrong decision, you can assess and reevaluate and make a different decision quickly. It's better to be wrong quickly than to be indecisive any day of the week. They talk about being happier and more satisfied with life. Adaptability has positive psychological impacts. You're bound to be happier when you're comfortable making adjustments to meet evolving needs and demands. And lastly, they have 2 more points here. You'll be better able to handle career transitions, which is self-explanatory, and you'll bounce back more quickly from adversity. Life is going to knock us down, right? We all know this. And especially those of us who travel, it feels like we're constantly being punched in the face by things we cannot control. But the more we learn to adapt and overcome those situations, the more easily we do it in the future. And that just helps us become more resilient and better equipped to handle anything that life can throw at us. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed what you saw, please share or heard. Please share with your friends and family. Listen to us on any of your favorite podcasting apps. Visit us at youtube.com/@theroadcoachpodcast. And if you're willing to support, please visit us on patreon.com/theroadcoachpodcast. Until next time, if you're like me and you're living on the road, I hope you're not only surviving, but thriving, even when you're out of your element.